à-bas-le-ciel.
I just don't understand, like, I guess the argument is the animal can't consent, right? But you think horses want you to ride them? Like, nothing about animals in our culture is consensual. Animals are constantly just abused, right? They're basically slaves, and then we eat them.
À-bas-le-ciel.
You know, I talked about this on my channel a million years ago, but I once spoke via the internet with a vegan who is one of these rat people, someone who loves pet rats, pet mice. And when she asked about my experience with that, I talked about it. I'm not going to say at length here, but I said, no, like in Laos, when we were doing humanitarian work, the main thing about getting rice to starving people there was preventing the rice from being eaten by rats. And, you got to come up with all kinds of solutions to that. And some solutions are more violent and some are less violent and what have you. But, what am I going to tell you? Vegans use these words that are actually scientific in an unscientific way. Every time vegans use the word symbiosis, you think humans and rats are going to live in symbiosis? Even these supposedly scientific vegans like Unnatural Vegan talk about evolution, the evolution of a dog. Well, that's something I should pick your brain on because you know about this. The evolution of a dog compared to a wolf. You had one video with some really interesting remarks in that, or one that I saw at least. This illusion that a dog is something profoundly and totally different from a wolf due to evolution, which again this is not the meaning of the word evolution. When human beings selectively breed an animal, that's not evolution. It's not natural selection, people. Anyway, to me, this is kind of a downward spiral of just fatuous, half true, half false beliefs that vegans are constructing for their own edification. But I was going to say, so on the wolf thing, I don't know if you had anything more to say about it, but I love that video you did where you just talked about the significance of a dog lying on its back and licking your face. And this behavior it's a direct inheritance of, it's a direct parallel to what wolves do in pack mentality in the wild. And, those are the behaviors where left to their own devices, dogs will revert to them. Absurdly, I've actually had to say to other vegans, it is literally a dog-eat-dog world. In the wild, big dogs will kill and eat little dogs, and so on,
Big dogs will eat little dogs. Bears will actually eat other bears.
Yes.
But the one thing I've said it, I know I've said it in comments on your channel, and I've said it in other places as well. This idea that there's absolutely no way that a dog could be released out of the wild is a little bit, on some level, silly to me, and it's just because what we know about wolves. The reality of the wolf reintroduction is that these animals were taken out of the wild in order to be saved. These populations, the starting animals that were put back in the wild had never known the wild.
Right.
They had no conception of it. Many of them had probably never hunted. I'm sure it's very possible none of them had ever hunted. The most they had known is that they were in a smaller enclosure just within the wild, just to get them used to what it's like to being out there, the temperature changes and things like that, not going into a hut at night.
Right.
And then in the reality of that program, there is a paper on there talking about the reality, just behavioral changes of wolves once you release them out in the wild, that in a real way, they just decided, on some level, we're just going to trust that they're going to figure it out.
Right.
And the Mexican gray wolf is what the paper's on. It's the smallest breed of wolf. Huh. It's a tiny animal. Huh. It's maybe 90 pounds. I mean, the ones that you find in, like, Alaska and, like, Canada are, like, I've never met a wolf, but the largest wolf I've ever heard of in captivity is like 140 pounds. Something stupid. There's like legends of 200-pound wolves. It's a 90-pound male, tiny little animal. And within like 4 weeks, like within a month, there was something in them that they figured out,
right.
Pack behavior. Taking down, mule deer or elk or whatever they have out there in Arizona.
Right. I would say also, something, again, my critics are too stupid for me to even respond to them most of the time. The other thing is that in many cases, human beings do put those animals through a kind of training program before reintroducing them. Probably that's true in your case also, where, at a minimum, they're switching from processed food to something that mimics, eating their natural prey or their natural foodstuffs or what have you. When you're preparing animals to be reintroduced to the wild, there is a type of training. There's a type of preparation they're given so that they can be reintroduced to the wild, which is true of many, many, many species. Now, even without that, there are so many examples of packs of feral dogs just returning to wolf-like behavior. It's not like we're talking about the cure for cancer here. This is not something on the outer limits of scientific knowledge that packs of dogs go back to living in the wild, sometimes in really extreme conditions, in the Arctic or what have you, where it's really tough to survive, that dogs can just do that anyway. It's happened more times than anyone can count. It's stuff of legend as well as the stuff of real scientific research. And pigs do it. Feral pigs escape from farms. But beyond that, yes, there are some animals where we actually take the care as human beings to try to train them and prepare them to survive before we put them back in the wild. There's a lot of fascinating stories with that too. But ethically and morally, can't we acknowledge the difference between those two things? Like keeping an animal in captivity and providing it with training so that it can survive in the forest is not the same as keeping an animal in captivity, castrating it, and training it so that it can spend the rest of its life sitting in a human being's living room, so that it can be reintroduced to be a toy and a plaything. Anyway, don't let me derail you, but to me, the concept of reintroduction to the wilderness as a sort of fundamental ethical value, and for me, ultimately, that's also the difference between wildlife management and the sanctuary and the zoo. A sanctuary is not preparing those animals to be reintroduced to the wild. A sanctuary is just giving them a place to wait to die. Even if we're talking about a monkey, right? Even if we're talking about elephants and monkeys. In a sanctuary, they're just held there, like a zoo, until they die. It's very different if we're talking about wildlife management, if we're talking about preparing animals to be reintroduced to feed themselves to survive in the wild.
One of the other things I think is that's interesting to me is I have people who watch my videos agree with some of my opinions on the role that zoos have played. It actually, on some level, whether you want to call it saving or actually contributing to populations of animals that were once really deficient in the wild becoming strong again. There's further questions you can ask about that, even in areas where they've been really successful and stuff like that. I've talked about the black-footed ferret before. Right. The reality of the black-footed ferret program is they didn't breed well in captivity. Artificial insemination was an important part of that program. Yeah. How do vegans feel about artificial insemination?
Right. You actually want me to answer that question?
It was implied.
Yeah, I know. But look, for me, there's this sort of challenge to tradition, which includes like Native American tradition, indigenous traditions, includes European traditions. I remember once, because I was studying Cree and Ojibwe, and you realize 99% of the people around me involved in that are not white. They're at least partly of indigenous blood. Most people interested in that field are not white people, naturally. And I remember once, I have no idea how the conversation turned this, but I was talking to another guy in the classroom about bow hunting, about using bows and arrows. And a woman in the class who I think she just didn't know what the conversation was. I think she broke in halfway, and she just acted offended. She said, like, "Excuse me," she was behaving as if I was presenting a stereotype that all Cree and Ojibwe people use bows and arrows. And I remember I said to her simply, my ancestors in Europe used bows and arrows also. We were just having a conversation about archery. It had nothing to do with the classroom was obviously of predominantly native ancestry. The context we were having this discussion in, but that wasn't the point. We weren't actually having a political conversation at that moment. But the reality is we do share globally. We do really share one heritage in that sense. Every civilization on Earth, its heritage is based on animal exploitation and war and fear and bows and arrows and, the actual, the animal sinew being cut out to make the bowstring, before modern technology. And here in Asia, the actual bow itself, the compound bow, was also, you had to kill animals to make the bow even. It wasn't a piece of solid wood here. And the whole civilization struggling to at all times have enough men skilled in archery, not really for hunting, but so they could fight other men. Okay, we have this terrible shared history that to some extent we all know or we're living in ignorance of. And, now we have to look ahead at the shared future because we've only got one planet. In some sense, we all eat from the same buffet table. We all eat off the same plate. And we don't even have fiction about this. We don't have a Star Trek. We don't have a Batman. We don't even have fiction imagining how the future is going to work based on the fundamental ecological and ethical facts that we now know, right? I just say vegans lack imagination for this. And globally, there's this terrible paucity of imagination among meat eaters and everyone else.
They're basically slaves, and then we eat them. Well, that's what animals are here for. Unless it's a pet that we have in our household. Right.
Like my Rottweiler is not abused. She's treated like fucking royalty.
Sure. According to you, right? But maybe she just wants to get some dick, and you won't have any male Rottweilers around to fuck her. Matter of fact, is there anything more abusive than taking someone's balls off of their body?
Well, no, I guess you're right. I guess if you cut your balls off, you become a eunuch.
Exactly. Game of Thrones, you're not getting it. Right?
À-bas-le-ciel.